Hi everybody, this is Module 2 Part 3, and in this section we're going to look at the application of the control banding system. This is a discussion around control banding which is taken from the NIOSH website. The NIOSH website is the site for the US Health and Safety, Government Health and Safety body, and it's always worth a visit. They have a lot of really good information there. I'm not going to try and break this up because it's important in its whole content, so I want you to just read it, please. Now, the take-home message from that last slide, or one of the take-home messages that's really important, is that using control banding isn't a replacement for experts in health and safety, particularly when we're looking at exposure monitoring and exposures measurement. And we often need hygienists to come and do that high-level control assistance, and that's the level 4 in the control approach. So this table comes from the HSC, the Health and Safety Executive, which is the UK health and safety body, and their COSH control banding model, which is one we'll refer to in your readings. The Table 1 shows that the factors in the core model, where you've got your health hazard or your potential for harm to humans, plus your exposure potential, so where the humans are going to encounter the hazardous substances and therefore become at risk to this particular harm. Your generic risk assessment, which is a combination of health hazard and exposure factors, and also helps you determine the design level of control, and then the actual controls. And you can see in Table 2 you've got 4 approaches. The first one is for general ventilation and good work practices. The second one is in engineering, and that's from exhaust ventilation through to partial enclosure. It doesn't tend to, when we're talking about controls, we're not talking about administrative controls at this level, so engineering controls. The third one is containment, so containment or enclosure to stop breaches of any containments. And the fourth one is seeking specialist advice, and that's where your hygienists and other experts would come in. This slide gives you an idea of the control bands for chemicals by inhalation, and it gives you an idea of the application for exposure limits. So there you can see in 4 different bands the types of dusts, the hazard groups that they fit into, and what you can see there is the different sizes of the particles within the exposure concentrations, and then the type of controls that you'd use. So this is the sort of table that you can end up laying out for particular substances, hazardous substances. And as you can see in number 4, you've got the size of the range of exposure, but you've got very toxic on single exposure, and they may be a reproductive hazard or a sensitizer, and you'd certainly need expert advice there. And there's a little note there that any exposure to any concentration of a sensitizer requires expert advice. If we're not thoroughly competent in managing those kinds of exposures, then we need to be using expertise. Now, there was a mention back 2 slides ago about risk phrases, and R phrases or risk phrases referred to in hazard identification steps, so the European risk phrases. They're assigned to the most important harmful effects of a chemical and can be found listed on the substances of an MSDS or a SDS. These R phrases have been classified by experienced toxicologists into hazard groups. Therefore, to allocate the hazardous substance to the hazard band, the control banding toolkit, that COSH toolkit that was mentioned 2 slides ago, the user identifies the substance's risk phrase from the SDS or the MSDS and finds this risk phrase in the hazard groups without actually needing the expert hygienist's risk group. And there's a list of these risk phrases and their meanings can be found at that COSH website. And you'll find these used in Australia too now. Now, that's all I'm going to talk about with control banding at the moment, because what you're going to do is view a couple of PowerPoints, and in one of them you get to work through the system of how control banding is applied, and then you get to have a play with how you go about it yourself in an interactive PowerPoint from the HSE. So what we've done in these 3 parts of Module 2 is looked at the introduction of physical classification of hazardous substances, the sort of toolkits that are out there for non-expert users which provide practical assessment and control of the related hazards. And then in the next 2 modules, so Modules 3 and Module 4, we'll look further at risk management systems and compliance with the local regulatory requirements. And basically what's happened in Australia is that we're using the globally harmonised systems now, so we need to be aware of all of those.